First, I want to welcome everybody who came out today at our 2023 annual Changing Lives Benefit Luncheon. I want you all seriously to give yourselves a round of applause because you're going to be in for a great afternoon here. Of course, this is new this year. We typically have our annual Changing Lives Benefit Breakfast, but as we were planning this, looking out over the crowd, we figured we probably didn't have the people that wanted to wake up at 7:30 in the morning post-pandemic and would much rather have a lunch. So it's a great turnout today. I'm Joe Meyer, honored and privileged to be the Executive Director and CEO here at Shelter House, and absolutely love the energy that we have in the room today.
Good afternoon. It is an honor to be able to be here to present this letter from the Senator to this wonderful organization. He is sorry he could not be here for this event today. Dear friends, I am pleased to extend my warmest greetings to all who are gathered for Shelter House's Changing Lives Benefit Luncheon. Each year, community members of Fairfax and Loudoun counties join together to celebrate the continued work of Shelter House to support their neighbors who are experiencing homelessness or domestic violence. By providing shelter, rapid housing prevention, and permanent supportive housing programs, your organization is investing in your clients' future and strengthening the region as a whole. This work is tremendously important as a stable home provides the foundation for a family's success. I commend the staff, board members, and volunteers of Shelter House for your efforts to improve the lives of others. I send my best wishes for a fulfilling and successful event. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexis, and please thank Senator Warner for those remarks. So over the last 4 years, a lot has happened. In 2019, Shelter House implemented its domestic violence prevention program, designed to help victims of domestic violence who wish to flee but are not able to enter the emergency shelter by providing flexible financial assistance and mobility advocacy services to help them obtain safe, affordable housing without ever becoming homeless. In 2020, Shelter House opened in partnership with Fairfax County government, the Fairfax County's first quarantine, protection, isolation, and decompression shelter in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I will say that this shelter played a critical role in the community's response to COVID-19. This shelter closed as we thought it was going to be open for 3 months. Just closed March of 2022. After 2 years, we were able to serve over 900 individuals and help them end their homelessness and get back into the community. And again, we want to thank our partners at Fairfax County, the Office of Prevention and Homelessness. Tom Barnett, the Deputy Director, is here also for helping us accomplish that. In 2021, Shelter House implemented its diversion program. This was through a partnership, again, with Fairfax County Government, Community Solutions, and Kaiser Permanente. This program helps neighbors find a safe alternative to homelessness. Through this pilot program, single individuals seeking shelter receive time-limited, solution-focused support when needed, flexible financial assistance to help them, again, avoid shelter. We will actually be touching more on this program shortly by one of our speakers. And in 2022, we expanded into Loudoun County. Loudoun County is an area that needs the expertise of homeless service providers like Shelter House. At that shelter, we're operating the emergency shelter, who serves individuals and families, the county's drop-in center, and the hypothermia shelter. And yes, we have already expanded our services with over hundreds of thousands of dollars in grants to expand our services to serve the Loudoun community. And most recently, just at the beginning of this year, Family Preservation and Strengthening Services, also known as Family Pass, merged with Shelter House. Now, as a program of Shelter House, Family Pass will continue to provide families with the path to economic self-sufficiency through intense case management and comprehensive support services. So we also want to welcome the supporters, the longtime supporters of Family Pass that are here today to help us grow that program. So I will say some of these programs, opportunities, and the outcomes that we've had, they've come from two things. Shelter House's unwavering reputation for providing the utmost professional services to people experiencing homelessness and domestic violence. And the second, it's been federal, state, local, and individual and business contributions during the COVID pandemic. But now here we are. All of us sitting in this room together is an example of how life is getting back to normal. However, the amazing professionals that work here at Shelter House will tell you it's far from normal from the people that are still reaching out for help. We are seeing the federal relief funding end, yet our services are ramping up. The residual effects of the pandemic are still hindering so many people. Rents are higher than ever, pricing people in poverty out of housing. Victims of domestic violence and sexual assault and human trafficking are now just coming forward because they have the means to escape their abuser. So when we say we're at the tail end of the pandemic, many of us are. But so many are just starting their life recovery. We have an incredible program today. Here ahead of us, I would love to introduce our first speaker, Ms. Erica James Jackson. Her wildly impressive bio is located inside your program, and we are absolutely honored to have her as part of the Shelter House Board of Directors and for her to share her story with us today. Ms. Erica?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry. Maybe you didn't hear me. I said good afternoon, everybody. All right. That's a little bit better. Thank you so much, Joe, for that introduction. The check is in the mail. For those of you who didn't recognize one of the most recognizable voices in American modern music, what you just heard was the Queen of Soul, the late, great Miss Aretha Franklin, singing the song, How I Got Over. It's a song that I call my lyrical inspiration for its ability to uplift and give me hope when I think about all that I have endured in this life and how I made it through. But a lot about Aretha's life was not known until her death. She experienced significant childhood trauma that included witnessing domestic violence, her mother's sudden death, molestation, and the 2 pregnancies that resulted from that molestation, all of which happened before her 16th birthday. She, like most people of her generation, didn't talk about events that took place in their homes. It just wasn't done. So many true stories, secrets, and family histories lie in cemeteries. And the following generation must try and navigate life without answers, all because of shame of someone else's transgressions. Today, I tell you, you're going to hear my story. I have removed the shame that I was clothed in for most of my life, And sincerely, I hope when I am done, you are enlightened on the perils of domestic violence, especially the long-lasting effects on child witnesses, and understand just how I got over. From as early as age 6 until I was nearly 13, I witnessed my father physically, verbally, and emotionally abuse my mother. Standing in a corner or sitting on the steps, undetected by the monster who was too focused on committing a violent act to notice my slender shadow was in the room. Feeling helpless and confused would plague my young life, and I was weighed down by carrying these family secrets. There was no one that I could share my thoughts with, so I read books, typically encyclopedias, imagining a life other than my own, illustrating a world that would be offered an escape hatch from my constant chaos. I listened to music with headphones to drown out the screaming and shouting of my parents or the thud of something hitting the floor above my head when I sat on the floor in our basement. Reading album liner notes brought me tremendous peace until my sanctuary would be interrupted by my father, who needed me to leave the basement to soothe his anger with enough alcohol to further blur his thoughts. Writing was truly my saving grace to get out that dysfunction that I couldn't tell anybody because of the unwritten domestic violence code. If you don't know it, I'll share it with you. What happens in this house stays in this house. Somebody else knows it also. But you know, never did I ever think that what I wrote as a child I would share with another living soul. Just focused all of my strength, power, and energy on suppressing the daily trials and tribulations that my toxic and often violent childhood was marred in. There were also times when my father would direct his wrath towards me. Leather belts were the commonly used tool to strike my thin, very thin, 50-pound frame, often on a bare body part. Other times, his enormous right hand would strike my youthful face, knocking me off my feet. And yet, as painful as it was to watch and receive my abuse, it was somehow more painful to see it happen to my mother. When the marital storms raged, we grabbed few, if any, personal belongings, forcing us to be prepared at a moment's notice to vacate the home for safe harbor. The turning point in their marriage came when my father showed up to my elementary school with a gun to kidnap me. When faced with my father's demands and gun, the school secretary alerted the principal, who called the authorities. My mother was also called to retrieve me from school. My father was detained, but not arrested. Keep in mind, folks, this was the 1970s, although many things still have not changed. Later that evening, upon his release, my obviously drunk father came to the house banging violently on the rear door of the house, yelling expletives for my mother to let him in. Clothed in our pajamas, my mother instructed my older sister and I to leave the house and get help. Reluctantly, we left after my mother refused and said, "I'm tired of running." We left the house by way of the front door and hid behind an apartment building across the street. The screen door on the front of the house used to make a loud squeak when opened, so after we left, my father heard the squeak and stopped ranting from the rear of the house and made his way to the front. The evening air was chilly that October evening, and the street seemed eerily quiet, so much so we could hear him stomping up the front steps from across the street. He opened the screen door so aggressively that the panes loosened from the aluminum frame and shattered on the porch. The wooden front door had been locked from the inside, and yet my father violently kicked it in and entered the house. No longer are my sister and I able to see any movement, so we ran barefoot in our pajamas down the street when a friend from the neighborhood saw us fleeing. After a few minutes passed, police sped down the street, sirens blared, and soon thereafter, our mother found us after frantically driving around the neighborhood. We fled to a motel in Arlington, Virginia, only to find that when my mother went inside the motel, that she didn't have enough money for us to stay the night. Tired and, of course, hungry, we picked up some fast food and drove back to that same motel's parking lot where we ate and then slept in the car until sunrise. We were safe and together, and for me, that's all that mattered. Later, we learned my father put his gun to my mother's head and pulled the trigger, but the gun didn't go off. I'm gonna say that one more time, because that one woo wasn't enough. Later, we learned my father put his gun to my mother's head, pulled the trigger, but it did not go off. In frustration, he threw the gun onto the living room floor and began to beat my mother instead. When the gun hit the floor, it discharged. That's when the police arrived. My parents separated, ultimately divorcing, and yet in his absence, my father's presence was still quite felt in the home. It was as if the venom he spewed was the paint on the walls, and the heavy smell of his bourbon-soaked breath was the air that I inhaled. The scent of his cologne and aftershave lingered on every floor, as did his voice yelling at the top of his smoke-filled lungs. Despite aggressive attempts to suppress what my senses endured, they all became triggers throughout my life. After my parents separated, I received no counseling, and not even as much as a conversation from my now single mother, who had to raise 2 children without any support, financial or otherwise. Because of her trauma and no obvious resources at her disposal, we just continued with life as if the abuse never happened. Despite the significant trauma I experienced, I typically had only a couple days to cope, shake off the fears of my father returning to kill us all, and somehow get back to the business of focusing my distracted thoughts on school. Thankfully, I excelled in school because I certainly had enough distractions that could have caused my grades to suffer. My teen years and into young adulthood are mostly a blur. I was looking for comfort and peace in all the wrong places, and somehow I thought I was capable of forging ahead with my life and having a successful marriage. In 1992, I got married and somehow thought that since my parents had divorced a decade prior, that I could flourish. Out of sight, out of mind, right? No, that wasn't the case. The first 5 years of my marriage were hell. If you don't believe me, my husband is sitting right there. Since I was determined not to allow what happened to my mother ever happen to me, I took an aggressive approach to my marriage, trying to put on the same pair of pants as my husband. He was not and never has been an aggressive man, and yet I treated him as if he was, and even blamed him for our disconnect. I wanted to fix him for our problems, resulting in us going to marriage counseling. It was clear to the counselor and ultimately me that I, in fact, was the problem. I was broken and in desperate need of repair. This brokenness is what can happen when a child witnesses domestic violence. Although I didn't come to Shelter House as a client, I stand here as a surrogate for others to inform you, without some intervention, a positive outlet, or inner strength that they somehow tap into, a child may become a whole host of negative things, a criminal, an addict, suicidal, or even themselves an abuser. Processing the anger, frustration, sadness, bewilderment, and fright that a child experiences can be overwhelming without help, but they often suffer in silence. I wasn't aware how much it was affecting me until it nearly consumed me. As you have heard today, my road wasn't always paved. Statistically, I was not supposed to survive. And yet, and yet, and yet, with my faith, time, counseling, reading, writing, music, a patient and loving husband that was meant for me. I did not choose him, he was chosen for me. A smart and wonderful son who unfortunately could not be here today because of work, and ultimately sharing my story is what was required to have me before you today. I am free. Not only am I free, I am free indeed. A woman with enough love now in her heart, overwhelming to give it away every chance she can. I removed hate from my heart and shame from the despicable acts that clouded my life for decades. I finally realized I did nothing wrong and was hiding someone else's transgressions. I decided to shine a light on my story, took a leap of faith, and after my husband's insistence, sought publication of my memoir and began giving others permission to share their stories. Intellectually, I knew I wasn't the only person that had experienced trauma, but having others share their truth with me boosted my confidence and gave a voice to my life's purpose. Today, I know my life's purpose and walk proudly, due in part to the great people here at Shelter House. Not only have they embraced me and my story, but they have also added to my platform to help save someone's life. As a new board member, I want to be a beacon of hope for those that have been or currently are in an abusive relationship or environment. I want to be a tireless and indispensable advocate for child witnesses. Lastly, I want to be bold and relentless in my efforts to bring increased awareness to domestic violence in the community. And as I close, if you see something, please say something. Pretend that the clear and present danger that you witness is a ticking time bomb. Don't videotape it for social media. Use your cell phone to call the authorities to diffuse the situation before someone perishes. Even if not asked, show some compassion and offer comfort and support to the victim and the family, because trust me, they need it. As you reflect on my story as I go to my seat, consider sharing your own one day, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, and realize by offering your time, your talent, or your treasure to the great people here that you have the power in your hands to help Shelter House continue changing lives, and in doing so, you allow someone else like me declare, surely it looks like a wonder how I got over. Thank you very much.
Erica, the applause said it all. Thank you for being courageous and for being up here today to share your story with everybody. Thank you. I'd now like to introduce our first participant speaker. Miss Steverly Anthony, who has gone through our services at Artemis House and will be sharing her courageous story. Steverly?
Hello, everybody. I'm a little bit nervous, so please bear with me. Hello, how are you? Don't be nervous. Can you hear me? Okay.
Take your time, baby.
My name is Steverly. I'm 31 years old. I'm a mom of two beautiful little girls who are 4 and 7. About 2 years ago, I moved to Virginia from New York due to a relationship that I did not know would go so very left. A relationship that once felt safe. But over time, he became abusive mentally and physically. He would hit me, kick me, punch me, slap me, spit on me, you name it. Sorry. Raising two little girls, I knew I needed to focus on being a mom and what I would want for their lives to be is the best version of a mom I could be for them. They were seeing their mom cry, hurt, all the time, physically and emotionally. And the day they saw me clean my bloody lip because of him, I knew that was it for me. And I needed to make a change for my daughters right then and there. I've always been a very strong-minded person, and once I say I'm done, I'm gonna do something, I usually get it done. This time was no difference, but I had a lot higher at stake. When I got to Virginia, I called several numbers, all of which told me they were unable to help. The final person I spoke with recommended I contact Shelter House. Then I called their hotline, and Victoria picked up. I explained my situation to her after I explained it to several other people, and that's where my life began to change. First, she asked a question that no one had asked me yet: is it safe to talk? Wow, she already cared about me. A feeling I hadn't felt in a very long time, and she promised me she would get me to safety. She told me to pack all that I possibly could for myself and my daughters, and although it wasn't much, I did exactly what she told me. I was safe at Artemis housing. Sorry. Huh? It was safe at Artemis housing. When you think about domestic violence, do you also think about who is helping those survivors with their trauma and rebuilding their lives when they get to safety? Because people like Victoria and the people that work at Shelter House are always key factors in how people like me survive. Victoria gave me her personal phone number so that I could contact her, update her as I was fleeing. She routinely checked on me, and she never not answered a phone call till this day. She provided me with so many wonderful resources like job opportunities, food donation, clothing donation, gift cards, birthday cakes for my daughters, so they could feel special for their birthdays when I couldn't do that on my own. The list goes on and on for how important she is to my story. When I first entered Artemis housing, it's not all of it. When I first entered Artemis housing, I secured a very low paying job in housekeeping for a nursing home making only $9 an hour. Today, I'm a security supervisor for Allied University. Today, I'm a security supervisor for Allied Universal, living in Reston, and Shelter House played a big role in where I am today. They taught me how to budget being in my own home and now I'm paying rent assistance free. Raising 2 girls all on my own, I thought it would all be impossible 2 years ago, but Shelter House gave me the push and the confidence that I needed, and most of all, support. Because if it wasn't for the support at Shelter House, I would not have been where I am today. 1 in 4 women are victims of domestic violence, and there are 200 people here today. If you are going through any kind of domestic violence, physically, emotionally, mentally, where you feel like you are one and feel like you can no longer survive, that is not true. I'm here to prove that to you. Organizations like Shelter House are here for you. They're here to save you. If you are thinking about donating to any organization that's helping people, it's always a beautiful thing knowing that you are doing something positive to help others. But I can only speak for Shelter House. I'm just one person, and the fact that they help thousands every year doing what they did for me, I know that it's also because of the support they have from people like you here today. Please know that you are saving someone's lives or just simply giving them another chance. Sometimes a second chance is all someone needs in life. And not many are lucky enough to experience that second chance I did. Thank you all.
The courage to be able to stand up in front of 200 people and just speak. And then speak about the life journey and the struggles is absolutely courageous. Ms. Steverly, thank you for sharing that with all of us.
It feels surreal that I'm here in front of you all today. I'm a survivor of mental, physical, and emotional abuse by my ex-husband. I wanted to divorce him, but he put up several fights to make that almost impossible for me. Because I wanted to flee my abuser, I left. I traveled states and hours away, and I never looked back. I made it to Virginia, and I knew that I would be safe. I also realized that I was on the verge of homelessness, and somehow I still felt relieved. After making a few calls to local resources in my community, I got in touch with Miss Sandra at Shelter House Division Program. My story would not be complete without her. With me today, I'm so honored that she's here. At the time, no shelters had available bed space, and I had no further means to afford a hotel. So I knew that my car was my next option, but I still had hope. Miss Sandra stayed in touch with me. She's truly my angel. She invested in me, in my well-being, and promised I didn't have to sleep in my car. She did deliver. She did everything to deliver. She helped me find affordable housing. She helped me buy clothes that I needed because I left with barely anything. And just was completely by my side. She helped me get back on my feet. I was able to get an apartment finally after getting my voucher transferred to Virginia. I don't have much, and I don't need much, but I owe it all to Sandra, my family, and my pastor, who is here today, for always believing in my future and helping me. I'm approaching a full year of being in my apartment, and I'm safe. Therefore, I'm happy. Because of Shelter House, I became stable, and I'm progressing and going forward with my life. I know I don't know 99% of you in this room today, but somehow I feel like we're all family because I'm a part of Shelter House, their family, and we all are here today for one reason: to support each other, to lift up each other with hope. Shelter House gave me hope. And maybe you don't accomplish everything on the timeline that you would like to, but if you maintain that level of hope to never give up, I believe that you can do anything. I know that sounds cliche, and that your life can truly change, especially sorry guys, especially when you have people here today that care so much about people like me. Your donations today extend beyond what you can even imagine. Your donations can be the bridge between someone getting the help that they need to improve their situation, their well-being, and possibly save their life. With that, I'd like to close by sharing a poem that I personally wrote. The poem is entitled, "There is Hope for All." When life takes you on a roller coaster ride and you don't know what to do you have hope? Hope that everything will work out fine. Hope starts in the mind and moves right down into your heart, but it has to have a beginning place to manifest, a place to start. Hope is believing that what seems to be the impossible, but still believing anyway. Hope lets you know that after the rain, the mud, and dark clouds will come bright sunny days. I hope that you all are encouraged today. Whatever today will bring, put hope in your mind and heart. It's a beautiful thing. Thank you.
The privilege that we have in this room to help somebody. Just two examples of what we've been able to do as a community to help them. I'd now like to invite our board chair from Cooper Ginsburg Gray, David Ginsburg, to the podium.
Thank you, Joe. As Joe said, my name is David Ginsberg. I'm honored to be the Shelter House Board Chair. First, I want to thank Erica, Steverly, and Teresa for sharing their personal experiences. It's incredibly difficult, incredibly courageous. Can't thank you enough for doing that today. Thank you. Also would like to thank all of the team members at Shelter House for all of their efforts every day in working with those in our community who are in need. Really can't thank them enough for all of their efforts, all their successes, the hope, the encouragement that they provide. Thank you all for everything you do. Putting on an event like today is not an easy thing to do. It requires an entire team, but on behalf of the Shelter House Board, I wanted to invite Nurjan Amadova to come up and to personally thank her. Nurjan, thank you so much. This event has been wonderful. It's fantastic to see everybody. It's all because of Nurjan's leadership. Thank you, Nurjan. I'd also like to take a moment to personally thank our matching sponsor, Ruslan Maksutov, for pledging a dollar-for-dollar match up to $20,000 in donations made today. Thank you, Ruslan. And I'm thrilled to announce that another of Shelter House's longtime friends and supporters let Shelter House know this morning that she would also like to donate a dollar-for-dollar match to today's event. Please join me in welcoming Kathy Alvarado, CEO and founder of Helios HR, to the stage. Thank you, Kathy.
Hello. Oh, you guys are warmed up. I'm shaking because of what our last three speakers just shared. And it's remarkable to see this room filled at such capacity and everybody have a place in their heart to support Shelter House. So I can tell you why Shelter House is so important to me. When I was a teenager, my parents separated, divorced. My mother remarried a man who was an abuser. And this man put her up on a pedestal. He told her things that she'd never heard before from my father, how beautiful she was, how important she was. And she was on that pedestal until he knocked her off. We weren't allowed to call 911 because what would the neighbors think? I found my mother at the bottom of the steps when he pushed her down the steps and her head hit the concrete floor. And I could do nothing for her because he wouldn't allow it. He had to take her to the hospital, blood pouring down the side of her head. We fled several times. We had friends. There were shelters that we could reach. Some of the people I know here who are still running some of those shelters, which is amazing. But what we didn't have at that time, there were not shelters that we had access to that were specialized in victims of domestic violence. And so we would go, we would come back, he would cry, he would say he would change, and we would go back and go back and go back. I had a sister who, still have my sister, she's 9 years junior than me, so she was much smaller. And there was one night when he came out and they were busted into my bedroom. It was my grandmother who was staying with us, my mother behind her, my sister was asleep, but he had a .357 Magnum pointed at my head, and they were all behind me. And I was able to talk him off the ledge because I think he really didn't think he wanted to go to jail. But it was a horrible position for a young person to be in. So I appreciate what you all are doing and recognizing how it impacts your children. But what's so different, we went to shelters, but we didn't have the conversations about domestic violence. And it wasn't until my mom confided in a friend at work what was happening Jenny invited her to come stay with her. So Jenny, she had a place to live. And Jenny had something similar go on in her life. So she was able, in that conversation, to give my mother hope, to give her hope. And that's what you guys do at Shelter House, Joe. The amazing team here at Shelter House, you heard the stories. They give hope. It's not enough to have a roof over your head. That doesn't change things long term. But hope works amazing wonders. And so that is why I am so supportive of this organization. So I want to ask and invite everybody here today, please contribute. Please support these amazing people who are doing this work in our community so that others may benefit from it. And those of you who are sharing your stories, keep sharing them, because your stories give others hope. And that's what we all need. And the tireless efforts of our friends at Shelter House is just amazing to me. You're doing so much to make an impact, so much to make a difference. So I encourage everybody today, even if you've already written a check, I encourage just everybody to give something so that you know a piece of you today is going to give somebody hope, and it's going to save their lives. Thank you.
This would have gone a little bit better for me this afternoon had I not just learned from a couple of people in the back that when they were in the planning session, the theme song that they wanted to play when I was coming up here to the podium was going to be the shark theme from the movie Jaws. And I'm very grateful that that didn't happen. My name is Tom Goodwin. I'm the immediate past chairman of the board at Shelter House. And I am delighted to be here today, not just because that's what I'm supposed to say, but because contributions in a volunteer capacity to Shelter House have been my life for over a dozen years. And just as Shelter House changes lives, so has Shelter House changed my life. But it's not my story to talk today. It's going to be your story, and the story that I'm going to tell is one of investment. And to do that, I'd like to start first by where's David? He's over there. Thank you very much, David, for your continuing and longstanding investment in Shelter House's mission to change lives. You are the one who showed us that there are ways to raise funds for a mission-driven nonprofit other than just going and asking people for money. And so we were able to be a little bit innovative. He's quite quiet and very deliberate in his style, but what he brought to us was a remarkable new way of thinking in terms of how we go about generating the support that we need, because in case you didn't know it, neither Fairfax County nor Loudoun County pays for the full boat, the full ride of all the services and programs and shelter that we provide at Shelter House and now Family Pass also. David's not alone, and so I'm going to make a couple of people stand up in the room, even though they've already been called out today, because I want to demonstrate to you just for a minute the difference between contributing to a charity, which is what we all do, and making an investment in a community service and program that actually demonstrably, empirically, changes and improves lives. And you only heard 3 stories today, and Kathy has a story too that we didn't get very far with, but the list goes on and on. There are several individuals in this room. I'm only going to take a couple minutes because we're going to be out of here. What I'm about to say is only going to take a few minutes, and it's not going to hurt a bit. First of all, Nathan and Valerie, Joe already called you out, but I do want you to stand up. These are 2 people who have invested their hearts and their souls, and put their money where their mouth is, to use the old expression, but not just their money, but their heart and their souls, truly engaged and committed. And we are so grateful to you, and thank you very much. So we're going to make Maddie stand up again. This is Maddie White. She does community outreach work for Congressman Connolly, and she's very good at it. And the reason that we're making her stand up is because we want her to go back to the Hill and tell the boss that over at Shelter House today, they talked about how our current effort to end homelessness in Fairfax County would not be where it is at all. Shelter House would not be the size it is. The county's commitment to fighting homelessness would not be what it is. And the amount of money that we've been able to raise to generate to continue to fight homelessness on behalf of those who do not have a roof over their head every day would not have been possible had it not been for United States Representative Jerry Connolly, D. Virginia. And he is the one who launched the original campaign to end homeless. And he truly saw what the work that we were doing was an investment. That's how he looked at it, and that's how he still looked at it. And you go back there and you tell him that, will you please? Because next year we want him to come. Sheriff Kincaid's lived experience includes domestic violence as a child. It's one of the many reasons she decided to go into law enforcement, not the only one, and I don't even think it was the main one, but she did wind up there and has continued her commitment to fighting domestic violence through her efforts as sheriff. She also is a ferocious homelessness advocate for ending homelessness. No one is in favor of homelessness, are they? A tremendous advocate for fighting homelessness through her annual program called Shop with the Sheriff, where they take 150 or more kids to a local store, a big box store, and they just have at it. And the kids get clothes that they wouldn't otherwise have, and maybe even some toys. Do we get toys? Yeah, we do. And other supplies and things that they need. And so Captain Jamie Pumpik's going to stand up. So the county executive was here and he had to leave, Brian J. Hill. You know what he is? He's a bureaucrat, technically, right? But only technically. Only in the most narrow sense is he a bureaucrat. He is a genuine leader for equity in Fairfax County, which is important to us because how many languages do we speak in Fairfax County? Anybody? Over 100, way over 100. And he has driven forward the cause of equity, diversion, and inclusiveness across programs, and Shelter House has picked up that lead and advocates for it in our work practices and in our operations. And he saw the need. He has to balance the demands, the political demands of the Board of Supervisors against the needs of an incredibly diverse population of 1.3 million people that we have here in Fairfax County. And so he is the one who fought for us, the bureaucrat, fought for us for the program, for the funding that we needed during pandemic, that he went out and got for us from the government. And he's also the one who helped manage to find a way, and this is going to knock your socks off, he's the one who finally found a way for us to be able to pay the professionals who perform our mission on a more competitive basis than had been. We'd not had raises in a number of years for the professionals, all of whom are in this room, and Brian Hill made that happen. So the next time you think county executive, think so. The funny thing about what happened was you saw that he had to leave. And he was complaining to me about having to leave because he says, I'm so busy, and I believe him. He said that I never get to eat lunch. So he left without lunch. So I guess the question would be, how many times can a person use the word invest in a warm-up? And I just did it a bunch, and I did it for a reason, and that's because what the Shelter House team is going to ask you today in just a few minutes through the captains who are at your table to make an investment in our mission to change lives, to consider this as what you are doing as a long-term investment in not only homelessness and not only Shelter House, but in our overall community. Now we're at the point where somebody's going to say, "How much do you want?" In fact, where is he? There's a man who was here. I was talking. Oh, he's over there. We were talking before lunch, and he said, well, I think I would like to contribute. I know this is a fundraiser, but I have no idea how much I should give. And I knew what the answer was, but I wasn't going to spoil my thunder here. And I said, well, hang around and we'll talk about that. And he said, I suppose you're probably going to tell us that no gift, no amount is too small, right? And he had a big smile on his face because he was so smart. And I said, no, sir, I'm sorry, no amount is too large. But he's still here, so I guess we're good to go. So this is what I want to say to you. If you agree that our community, and increasingly Loudoun County as well, if you agree that in our community, we all do better when we all do better, then you will want to consider making an investment in Shelter House. If you agree that our county cannot continue to be prosperous in a very competitive environment, do you read about that in the paper, the competitive environment? Who thinks of a county as being competitive? But we are, for services, for resources, for business, for tax revenue, and the things that people rely on and look to when they want to make an investment. They look at safety, they look at reliability, they look at the quality, then the satisfaction of the workforce, they look for quality of life. If you agree that that's important, if you agree that in a county like that, a community like ours, that no family should be without a roof over its head for even a single freaking night, which happens, and often because they're just a paycheck away from the shelter, which happens, then you're going to make an investment in Shelter House today. And finally, did you hear when Erica talked about, I hadn't heard this before, you said, I got tired of running. And I looked at Nurjan, where is she over there? And I said, did you hear that? And she said, yeah. And I wanted to say that the women in particular who come to Artemis House for shelter, they've been running all the time and they want to stop running. And some of them can't afford to run. And some of them are going to get hurt if they run. So that's why they come and see us. And especially at Artemis House. In fact, by definition at Artemis House, the women who come are in imminent fear, danger of their lives. That's why they come. That's why they call us. Last year, women made 200 calls to the domestic violence hotline at Artemis House. 200 calls. These calls are managed mostly by professional people, some people with a little bit of training, some people with a lot more training. In fact, we asked the county to help kick in some new money to help us beef up the effort for the domestic violence hotline calls because they're coming up. These calls, it's not unusual for these calls to last 90 minutes. And these calls are full of tears and fear. These calls are full of long silences. These calls are full of whispers. And these calls have to be delicately managed. And there were 200 of them. Then I'll tell you that last year, we sent 372 families from the homeless shelter into permanent housing. They don't live in the shelter anymore. They have permanent housing. This is what social service programs are supposed to be all about, and increasingly we are seeing that happen in our county. Increasing reliance on helping people get the tools they need to make their own lives better, rather than just reaching out and helping them. 372 families. And the last one, what if you knew a kid who, when he went home from school, couldn't go home because he didn't have a home because he had to go to a shelter. But he had to go someplace because he couldn't stay after school because he couldn't afford an instrument to play in a band, or because he didn't have the equipment needed to play a sports team. Or how about when she went home for Thanksgiving or for Christmas, she didn't go home at all, but she went to a shelter, a place that was not her home? And the instability that comes with that, and the insecurity that she has in her food intake that she gets. Food insecurity is a major problem for many of our people. 800 kids. We moved them into permanent housing. Shelter House is now in its 38th, where's Joe? 38th year, 40th year, 41st year. Will anybody give me 42? 40, for 40 years, and there are a number of us in the room who have been around a good chunk of that time, volunteering in some capacity, not only because we believe, but because we know it works. We know how to end homelessness, you know? We do. And we're continuing to do that. Domestic violence is a little tougher. Sometimes I think it's intractable. But we keep at it, and we are making progress. And the county and Shelter House and Artemis House working all together to make it happen. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. Hope you have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you again.